Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into Chapter 8 of Dr. Jose Joel Eggo's fascinating book, The Death of Utopia. We're going to break down a really specific structural phenomenon outlined in the text, how a movement that promises absolute liberation can structurally and almost inevitably morph right into a machinery of fear. The book uses the Communist Party of the Philippines, or the CPP, as its main case study, mapping out exactly how an ideology can become an inescapable trap for the very people who follow it.
To kick things off, let's look at this chilling warning from philosopher Karl Popper. This quote perfectly sets the stage for what we're exploring today. You see, Dr. Eggo relies on Popper's framework of the open society to evaluate the CPP as a closed society. And Popper's golden rule is basically this: if an ideology believes it holds the absolute, unquestionable truth, it literally cannot admit when it's wrong. And as the source material argues, if you can't correct an idea with healthy debate, you end up having to protect it with violence.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, From Conviction to Command.
So every movement needs recruits, right? And usually people join up because of deep, genuine emotions. But the text outlines what's essentially a classic bait and switch. On one side, recruits are pulled in by conviction, this noble, idealistic drive to fight injustice, poverty, and oppression. But Dr. Eggo points out that once you step inside this closed system, that belief quietly twists into command. Suddenly, the party holds a total monopoly on the truth. And at that point, disagreeing isn't just having a different opinion, it's literally treated as a crime against truth itself.
That brings us to Section 2, the democratic centralism trap.
Now, let's look at the actual structural mechanism that traps these recruits. It's a concept called democratic centralism. And honestly, on paper, it sounds completely fair. It promises balance, saying, hey, members can debate all they want before we make a decision, but after that, absolute obedience is mandatory. But as the source material argues, in actual practice, it's basically a gag order with a smile. It's a highly effective tool for enforcing absolute conformity.
Dr. Eggo breaks the grim reality down into 3 distinct steps. First off, any debate that does happen is purely performative, and it's strictly reserved for top insiders. Second, a tiny, tiny circle at the very top makes the actual decision, which was probably already predetermined anyway. And third, here is the trap. Once that official line is dropped, questioning it becomes counter-revolutionary. It really shows how unity is manufactured here. It's not built on genuine agreement. It's forged out of exhaustion and this intense fear of being branded a traitor.
Moving on to Section 3, Paranoia and Internal Purges.
So, what happens when a system outright bans dissent? Well, the author illustrates that the closed system inevitably turns on its own people. When an organization flat-out refuses to blame its ideology for its failures, it has to find a scapegoat. It starts hunting for spies. The book actually maps out these huge historical waves of internal purges. In 1984, you had Campanyang Ahos in Mindanao, where the CPP started accusing its own loyal members of being military spies. Then in 1988, Oplon Missing Link went after dissenters in southern Tagalog. The text reveals that this paranoia wasn't just some accident or a rogue unit making a mistake. No, it was a systemic policy where thousands of cadres, students, and organizers were tortured or killed by their own comrades.
To process all these purges, the movement relied on something they called people's justice. The author paints a pretty grim picture of this, describing them as kangaroo courts. Think about it: no evidence required, no legal counsel granted, and absolutely no right to appeal. In a closed society built entirely on paranoia, the accusation itself is the punishment. If the party accuses you, you're guilty, full stop. The weapon isn't just the gun, it's the label of being a spy.
Which leads us to Section 4, the assassination assembly line.
The book details how this intense paranoia is weaponized, not just internally, but against outsiders in a highly structured way. It's described as an assassination assembly line, and it starts right out in the open. First, a target. Maybe it's a former member who left, a dissenting indigenous leader, or even just a stubborn local official, is politically vilified. Legal front organizations label them a fascist or a spy. Once their reputation is completely destroyed and their support systems are stripped away, step 2 kicks in. The target is quietly executed by the armed wing, the NPA. It's essentially a systematic process of terror grooming.
Just take a look at this harrowing quote from a former insider, which is pulled from Senate testimonies highlighted in the book. It really drives home the inescapable nature of this trap. You cannot leave alive if you know too much. It shines a light on the terrifying reality for whistleblowers. If a cadre notices corruption or questions where revolutionary taxes are really going, they can't just hand in their resignation. In a free society, whistleblowers get protection, right? But in this closed system, as the text points out, they get graves.
Let's look at Section 5, Why Doubt is Deadly.
This brings up a really fundamental philosophical question from the text. Why does this movement have to kill doubt just to survive? Like, why can't they just agree to disagree? Well, the source material uses Karl Popper's framework to break down the psychology here. The CPP claims its victory is scientifically guaranteed by history itself. Because of that, the doctrine is treated as completely infallible. So if someone stands up and asks, hey, what if we're wrong? They aren't just offering a critique, they're threatening the absolute foundation of the ideology. They're framed as traitors. This closed system literally has to eliminate these threats just to protect its core illusion of infallibility.
And when that prophecy of a perfect utopian revolution fails, when reality stubbornly refuses to match the party's predictions, like when the masses don't spontaneously rise up or the economy actually grows instead of collapsing, the ideology can't just say, oops, we made a mistake. Instead, as Dr. Echo's analysis of Popper shows, the whole system turns violently inward. It blames its own people for being weak or infiltrated, and that failed prophecy inevitably demands blood instead of admitting error.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the cost of utopia. We really need to weigh the true cost of this utopian promise against the stark reality it actually delivered to its followers. Dr. Echo directly contrasts those incredibly romantic ideals used to lure in young, hopeful recruits, things like liberation, justice, and equality, with the harsh, documented ledger of the past few decades. On the right side, you see the reality delivered: mass graves from internal purges, broken families, violently silenced dissent, and the demand for unquestioning submission. The book argues forcefully that any ideology has to be judged by its real-world results, not by its catchy slogans.
And that brings us full circle back to Karl Popper, who reminds us of a very simple yet profound truth. The open society is one in which people have the right to say what they think. According to this philosophical framework, true freedom relies completely on your ability to criticize your leaders, point out flaws, and correct mistakes without the constant fear of violence hanging over your head. A movement that has to kill dissent to protect its ideas is the exact opposite of liberation.
So, we're going to wrap up this explainer with a pretty heavy question drawn right from the text's analysis. Think about everything we've just covered, from the illusion of democratic centralism to the assassination assembly line. Can a society, or even a movement, truly be considered free if simply asking a question is treated as a crime? I'll leave you to ponder that and to think about the true nature of closed ideological systems. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the anatomy of an ideological trap. Stay curious, and as always, keep asking questions.